Fire missile from 8 kilometres. The secretive drone program has reportedly killed more than 3,000 people in Pakistan, Yemen and Somalia, and at least 2 Australians. In November last year, 27-year-old Australian Christopher Harvard was killed by a missile from a drone strike while travelling in the remote east of Yemen, a known al-Qaeda stronghold. Harvard's family in Queensland know very little about their son's death, and the Australian government has refused to comment on the specifics of his case. Dylan Welch has been investigating the life and violent death of the young Australian and spoke exclusively to his family.
Australia's tropical north is a world away from the turmoil of the Arabian Peninsula. But it was here, in Townsville, that a lost young man called Christopher Harvard found his faith and began a remarkable journey to one of the world's most dangerous places. It was to end in tragedy, as his parents learned from the federal police.
We got the phone call to say that they were coming down, they wanted to see us. Of course, at that stage we didn't know nothing until they got there about 8 o'clock that night. That's when we were informed of Chris's death.
And what did they tell you?
That Chris had been killed. We couldn't believe what we were hearing.
Harvard was killed in a US drone attack in Yemen on November 19 last year. His parents remain desperate for answers and feel abandoned by their government.
They said the coroner was going to ring us and tell us how he was killed. We haven't had that, no death certificate. Every time we ask questions, they just won't answer. Won't give us any explanation whatsoever.
Harvard grew up an only child in Townsville after his father died when he was 2. He was a troubled kid and at 16 spent 6 months in jail for car theft.
Well, I think just because he'd done a small crime and then realised that he was in jail with
Criminals.
With really bad criminals. And when he came out, he said no. He said he never wanted to go back there for any reason.
Later, while studying at James Cook University, he met some Muslim students. One day, he called his mother to ask if he could convert to Islam.
He asked us if he could, if it was okay if he could join up and be Muslim, and we said yes, if that makes you happy and that's what you really want, yes. So
and from that time it changed his whole life.
Yeah, it changed his whole life.
His outlook on life.
Yeah.
Harvard converted in a small ceremony in 2008 at Townsville's King Fahd Mosque. According to his parents, he became a new man.
He'd give up the drinking.
He didn't.
And give up the smoking, everything. That's because he believed in what was in the Quran.
He was, the Quran was everything to him.
He wouldn't even let you touch it unless you went and washed your hands first. That's how much he believed in it.
Buoyed by his new faith, Harvard moved to Christchurch in New Zealand, where he joined the local mosque.
He's a very helpful person, a very nice guy, always soft-spoken, never raised his voice, and yeah, he was a good Muslim.
He didn't mention all of it, but drugs and gangs. That's what he briefly mentioned of his troubled past. But when you can convert, all your past is behind you, so you start a new life, and that's what I felt, that he had started a new life, and never have seen him doing anything bad.
Harvard told his parents it was during his time in New Zealand that he first encountered radical Islam. So he felt that people were preaching extreme Islam?
Yes. And not what was in the Quran.
Yes.
They'd gone outside the boundary of what was in that.
It was in New Zealand that he met another Western convert, Darryl Jones, who had changed his name to Muslim bin John. In 2010, his parents received some startling news.
Then all of a sudden he rings us up and says, oh, I'm thinking about going to Yemen.
It was all paid for. Someone paid for it, for him to go to teaching in Yemen.
He was offered to go to Yemen to teach English.
He never told them who paid for the trip.
He never mentioned names. That was one thing he never did. And he just said, oh, they've offered to pay for my trip to go over there and teach English.
In 2011, Harvard landed in the Yemeni capital, Sana'a. The city is one of the centres of the US war against Al-Qaeda. Since the late 1990s, a group now known as Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, or AQAP, has waged a war against the US. In response, the US has launched a CIA-run campaign of targeted killings of AQAP members, relying in recent years in particular on unmanned drones armed with tank-busting Hellfire missiles. Harvard's parents maintain he was there teaching English, though they acknowledge he did not discuss the people he associated with.
He went to prayer every day, which is what they normally do, but he sort of didn't sort of say about
not specific people.
Specific people. He would never talk.
No.
The Dowricks learned their son was under suspicion one day in 2012 when the phone rang.
It was from the ASIO I got the call, and they just told me that they'd cancelled his passport. And then I just passed it on to Chris that they'd cancelled it, but he thought, oh, I don't know whether he believed me, and when he wanted to leave, because he'd actually gone to the airport to fly out when he couldn't. So then he had to stay in Yemen.
The family was not told why his passport was cancelled, but by this time the Australian government appeared to know more than they were letting on. According to documents obtained by 730 under FOI,
Mr Harvard and Mr Bin John were individuals of long-standing interest to the AFP due to their assessed activities in Yemen linked to Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula.
My name is Dominic Neubauer. I'm an Austrian citizen. I've been taken hostage on the 21st of December 2012 by Yemeni tribe.
in an extraordinary development, 730 can reveal authorities accused Harvard of being involved in the 2012 kidnapping, blamed on Al-Qaeda, of 3 Europeans, including Dominic Neubauer.
I appeal to the Yemeni government, to the Austrian government and to all other governments concerned, and to the European Union, to give them what they want. Otherwise they will kill me 7 days after this video is published.
Neubauer and his colleagues were released in May last year, after a multi-million-dollar ransom was paid. The documents obtained by 730 reveal that before his death, the AFP had begun an investigation into Harvard's possible involvement in the kidnapping.
Everything that the government is saying, it's all hearsay. There's never been 1 ounce of proof given to us by any department of the government to prove that he was or he was not a terrorist, because they don't want it.
But even as he was being investigated for terrorism, Harvard stayed in contact with his parents. This was his last message to them, sent on November 1 last year.
Hi, good to get your email. Sad to hear that Nana and Pop are moving into a retirement village. I hope they're okay. Send them my love and tell them that they're always in my prayers.
On November 19, Harvard and his friend Daryl Jones were driving in Yemen's east with 3 AQAP members when the car was blasted apart by a drone-fired missile.
It was at least a month after he was killed before we knew.
Yeah.
Harvard's family say the government first told them he'd been killed in a Yemeni government airstrike on a mosque. Later, that he was killed in a car.
Chris was collateral damage, and then from there the stories just got more and more. Oh, they changed the story every week.
And what effect has that had on you?
Terrible. How can you move on? How can you have closure?
because we'd never seen Chris's body. We couldn't bring him home to bury him. So to us, we will never have closure.
And no one was there when Chris was buried. That's the worst part.
Harvard's death has led to new questions about what role the joint US-Australian intelligence facility at Pine Gap has played in providing information used in drone strikes.
There are really concerning allegations that Pine Gap is used to locate and track suspects that are then killed in US drone strikes. We've asked the Australian government to provide some critical information and very basic information to the Australian public. Are we involved in the drone strikes? If so, what is the legal basis for our involvement?
Christopher Harvard's parents want the government to tell them exactly how he died and what evidence they have that he was involved with Al-Qaeda.
How do we move on? We got no closure. We got no proof of Chris's body or death certificate or how he was actually killed. So how can you move on?
What do